Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here. In this video, I wanted to continue to look at the preface to the Legacy Standard Bible, which is a translation that's being produced by Pastor John MacArthur and faculty from the Master's Seminary. I've looked at this preface a little bit in previous videos. In this video, I specifically want to look at the part of the preface talking about the terminology of slave. So this translation is going to be an update of the New American Standard Bible, so it will largely look and sound like the NASB. However, they are making some modifications. And in the last video, I talked about how they are going to be translating the Old Testament name for God as Yahweh, which is a break from how a lot of translations translate that term. But another change that they're going to make, and they've talked about this, has to do with the New Testament word for slave. So it says here, the NASB has already translated the Greek term doulos frequently as slave in the New Testament. The LSB made this consistent across the New Testament. This upholds the lexical definition of the term, its consistent translation, and its distinction from other terms that do denote a servant. Such consistency also highlights a biblical theological reality that Christians were slaves of sin, but now are slaves of Christ. Romans 6:16-22. Biblical writers did not shy away from this term because it condemned a wicked form of slavery, i.e. to sin, Satan, and death, highlighted the power of redemption, and affirmed one's total submission to the lordship of Christ. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew term ebed has more flexibility than doulos in the New Testament. For the word ebed, the notion of servant and slave can be present in describing one's relationship with God and man. The Messiah is the suffering servant, even as Israel was a slave of Egypt, but now a slave of God. Likewise, Joseph's brothers call themselves Joseph's servants, but later in the same verse, they say they are willing to become Joseph's slaves, again the same term. All of this demonstrates that ebed can have both the notion of servant and slave. For this reason, the New Testament translates ebed not merely with doulos, but other words, for example, pais. The apostles recognize that ebed can have different nuances that go beyond slave. Accordingly, in human relationships, the term servant is used for ebed when talking about one's general submission to another, as opposed to economic ownership, slave. In relationships between man and God, slave is used unless ebed occurs with a personal name, for example, my servant David. This formulation conforms to the nuances of the word and also connects well with New Testament usage of slave. This translation principle also often brings out that God's people emphasize their total subjection to their loving God by calling themselves his slave, even as he uses them uniquely as his servants in his plan. Now, the fact that a MacArthur-produced translation is going to use the term slave in the New Testament to translate doulos, and they're going to try to be very consistent with that, isn't really surprising in light of things that Pastor MacArthur has written and talked about. He actually has a book out called Slave, which I have here on Amazon. It says, Slave, the Hidden Truth About Your Identity in Christ. It has an interesting book description here. It says, a cover-up of biblical proportions. Centuries ago, English translators perpetrated a fraud in the New Testament, and it's been purposely hidden and covered up ever since. Your own Bible is probably included in the cover-up. In this book, John MacArthur unveils the essential and clarifying revelation that may be keeping you from a fulfilling and correct relationship with God. It's powerful, it's controversial, and with new eyes, you'll see the riches of your salvation in a radically new way. What does it mean to be a Christian the way Jesus defined it? MacArthur says it all boils down to one word: slave. We have been bought with a price. We belong to Christ. We are his own possession. So it says that book came out in 2012. So obviously MacArthur does have a particular view of how this word should be translated, and that it does actually affect our understanding of Christianity. Now, I don't think he wrote that blurb there about the book, but I do think it echoes a lot of what he has said himself. So this brings up an interesting question. How much will the Legacy Standard Bible use unique terminology that echoes MacArthur's beliefs and teaching. And I think to some degree it will. We see that with the word Yahweh. We see that with the word slave, doulos. However, I don't think they're going to take that too far. And we can see, for example, I think someone asked about the word baptize. Are they going to translate that differently and translate it as the word immerse, for example? Well, if you look here at the Legacy Standard Bible example from the book of Mark, and this is the only book that I've seen available, by the way, so I don't have more to look at. But in the book of Mark, it does say in Mark 1:9, "Now it happened that in those days Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan." So they are choosing to use the term baptize, which is really, I think, just a transliteration of the Greek word is the way that we would put that. So we're not technically translating it by saying here's an English word, although baptize has become an English word. But it's an ambiguous term in English today because so many people baptize infants using things like sprinkling. But some people would say that the word baptize really means to immerse. That's what it would mean in English. I am a Baptist, so that's the way that I personally lean, obviously. But it doesn't look like the Legacy Standard Bible is going to change the translation of baptize from how it's normally been presented in other translations historically. Another person asked about the word tongues and if they're going to translate that as languages, more reflective of Pastor MacArthur's theology. Now, I really don't know. I do know that the New American Standard Bible tended to translate that as tongues, so I would assume that they're probably going to keep that the same, but we'll see what happens with that word. I have to say that I think that they're going to try to make this translation stand out a little bit and make it a unique translation so that it's not exactly like the New American Standard Bible. They want to make it better from their perspective. But I also think that they don't want to make it so different that it just strikes people as a real niche or unusual translation. So I think they're going to try to strike a balance there. But you can see with this term doulos being translated as slave in the New Testament that they are doing something that a lot of other translations haven't done. Although the Holman Christian Standard Bible did often translate the word doulos as slave more so than other translations. But again, the Holman Christian Standard Bible was updated to the Christian Standard Bible, and so a lot of changes were made in areas like that. Anyway, that's a whole other issue, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more here about the preface to the Legacy Standard Bible, give us a glimpse into the philosophy and approach of the translators of the Legacy Standard Bible, and also a glimpse into what this translation will actually look like. So I hope it's been interesting and helpful. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments below. Try to keep those comments constructive, helpful to conversation. But thank you as always for listening to what I have to say from A Frisch Perspective.